Book of Mormon News. Mathematical and linguistic analysis reveals amazing patterns in characters that Joseph Smith copied from the golden plates. Prominent character sequences appear to be numbers that match important Book of Mormon dates. For almost 200 years, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints have claimed that the scrap of paper shown here contains characters from the ancient golden plates from which the modern Book of Mormon was translated by Joseph Smith. Although those plates were seen by 12 eyewitnesses who testified of their reality over and over again to the ends of their lives, Smith never showed them to anybody else, and they were never seen again after he declared that he was obligated to return them to an angel named Moroni. The plates were never subjected to examination by modern science, and doubters have assumed all along that the characters shown above were nothing more than the random imaginings of a charlatan. However, in 2015, a Book of Mormon enthusiast who also happens to be an engineer and linguist has demonstrated a credible body of numeric and linguistic glyphs and a corresponding syntax that, when applied to the characters shown above, yield a compelling number of dates that correspond precisely with important events and calendars from the Book of Mormon. For example, according to this interpretation of the glyphs, the last three characters above, from the lower left-hand corner, translate to 384. The significance of this number can hardly be overstated, since, according to the Book of Mormon itself, Mormon died in 385 AD, and the year 384 would have been the last whose summary he could inscribe onto the golden plates according to his established pattern as a historian. Jerry D. Grover, Jr. is a professional civil engineer. Very passionate about the Book of Mormon, he also speaks several languages and has worked as a translator. His passions have led him to study the document illustrated above, which he has named the Characters document, with reference to the title penned by John Whitmer when he copied them from a long-lost original. Grover's approach is comprehensive, starting with his interpretation of several strings of Egyptian and Mesoamerican numbers, and working outward from there through identification of calendar systems and the names of Book of Mormon kings, prophets, and tribes from the decoded time periods. His work has resulted in the free publication of an impressive, scholarly, 238-page book in which he proposes a translation of the entire document, yielding 2 paragraphs and an additional long block listing prophecies and related events with their associated dates and calendars. Grover knows that his work is going to be controversial. For almost 200 years, those characters have resisted and frustrated the efforts of translators, who have heretofore universally agreed that there is simply not enough information to permit translation by conventional means. Indeed, opponents of Mormonism can never concede any credibility to a translation of the sort that Grover proposes, and conventional scholars would have their careers destroyed if they ever supported work associated with documents now in the possession of an angel. Conventional translation of ancient languages requires a large body of text so that patterns can be identified. With just 7 lines of characters from a single document and a few other available historic details to work with, Grover had to use a less conventional approach. He based his work on the following premise. There ought to be a set of linguistic and mathematical rules which, when consistently applied to the glyphs in the Characters document, will translate into Book of Mormon dates, names, idioms, and history. Now, in a way, this premise is similar to the science of modern cryptography, in which computers are programmed to use brute force to try rearranging encrypted text according to trillions upon trillions of different cryptographic keys, one by one. There is an underlying assumption that a correct key exists somewhere, and that if it is found, the ciphertext will contain some meaningful message. Every incorrect key results in meaningless gobbledygook, but if the correct key is ever guessed, then the underlying language, numbers, patterns, and structure of the original plain text leaps off the page, and the translation is deemed to be correct. Grover decided to test the characters to see if a reasonable translation would yield language consistent with several assertions from the Book of Mormon itself and from leading modern theories about it. As a starting point, his fundamental assumptions were: 1. The glyphs used by Mormon had originated as some version of Egyptian hieratic extant in 600 BC or previous to 600 BC. 2. That language evolved to become Reformed Egyptian by the time Moroni completed Mormon's work 1,021 years later. And 3. Nephite Reformed Egyptian continued to evolve, and, through the well-known practice of linguistic borrowing, it influenced other Mesoamerican writing during the subsequent 1100 years after Book of Mormon times. Accordingly, Grover reasoned that the characters ought to be considered as a mixture of languages about halfway between those extremes. He further assumed that when properly translated, the characters document ought to contain dates, names, and linguistic idioms that are prominent in the well-known English translation of the Book of Mormon as published back in 1830. The results are breathtaking. His set of number and word glyphs works like a cryptographic key to unlock the original document into a compelling set of mutually supportive, consistent, interlocking dates, calendars, and associated details. According to Grover, the characters document, quote, appears to be from the front plate of the Book of Mormon, and it forms a preface and calendrical summary, end quote. For example, he proposes that small integers and other fundamental numeric values are written with the following characters. Now take a look at these examples associated with the integers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 9 plates, 10, 11, 12, 13, 19, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 80, 300, 400, 1,000, 20,000, and 1 million or multitude. He also proposes that the characters are to be read from right to left, top to bottom, and that numeric sequences accumulate in a simple additive form to represent numbers that turn out to be reasonable, significant, prominent, and mutually supporting in a Book of Mormon context. The astute reader will notice an underlying logic to use of individual dots, groups of dots, and obvious similarities between the interpretation for characters 1 and 11, between 2 and 12, between 3 and 13, between 30 and 300, between 40 and 80, etc. Other similarities, derivations, relationships, or contrasts are less obvious. Grover devotes about 100 pages of his book to these numeric symbols and mathematical structures, explaining his reasoning for each number and illustrating similar characters from ancient Egyptian, ancient Hebrew, and later Mesoamerican texts to back up his assertion that each interpretation is at least as reasonable as accepted interpretations made by scholars using more conventional means of analysis. I exchanged email with Jerry Grover on this subject, referring to his book, which is available as a free PDF download from his website at www.bookofmormoncharacterstranslation.com. He said, quote, I am trying to make it clear by all of the documentation in the book that the document is primarily hieratic Egyptian, with some demotic Egyptian, both with some modifications, and that all sources used for the translation are standard, academically accepted Egyptian references, end quote. In every case, Grover is able to identify at least one example in which a similar character has been rendered the same value. In doing this, Grover is not asserting that Mormon drew upon the same ancient documents that the modern scholars have referenced. He is simply pointing out that reasonable scholars have found it reasonable to assert that other ancient languages evolved along similar lines, and that those other scholars interpret identical or nearly identical characters in the same way as the interpretation that he has used and that leads to his overall translation. Here are two examples. 24 plates is written by combining the symbols for 10 plus 5 plus 9 plates. And the number 384 is written by combining the symbols for 4 plus 80 plus 300. Here is Grover's proposed translation of the entire characters document. Quote, "In the 19th regnal year of Mosiah I, the Nephites traveled over the mountains to the foreign-speaking people of Mulek. These 20,000 children of Mosiah traveled downriver on the east side of the river Sidon for 80 days and reached Zarahemla. And then it came to pass that after 10 years, thus began the period of the 7 tribes. After the space of 21 more years had passed, Zeniff, with 60 of his people, departed. 53 more years then passed. Then the Limhites obtained 24 plates from the west in the land of desolation, returning upriver on the river of Lamanite possessions. After their return upriver, 7 years later, the Limhites traveled west, bringing the pure gold jaredite plates to Mosiah II, which he translated. Previous to the arrival of the Limhites, Benjamin was made king in the 2nd month of the 436th year after Lehi left Jerusalem. At the age of 83, King Benjamin ascended to eternity, which was 479 years after Lehi left Jerusalem. King Benjamin's death occurred 1 1/3 years before the arrival of the Limhites. 4 years before the arrival of the Limhites, the period of the 7 tribes ended in conjunction with the Jubilee year. 60½ months prior to the coming of Christ, Samuel the Lamanite came to the Nephites and the Lamanites. The Nephite primary count calendar was shifted from the 1,000-year calendar to the coming of Christ calendar, effective retroactively 9 years after the coming of the Christ calendar started. The 600-year Lehi departure calendar period ended. In the 92nd year of the reign of the judges, the first and most high king, Christ the Son, came to the land of Jerusalem. After he was born, 2 days of brightness occurred. The Gadianton tribe arose. Nephi departed. Siege of the Gadianton robbers. Praise voiced to God. A jubilee year takes place which completes the 12th jubilee period of the 1,000-year calendar. On the 1st month of the 125th year of the reign of the judges calendar, Christ came to the people. After remaining 50 weeks, in the 12th month of the 34th year of the coming of Christ calendar, Christ ascends upwards to heaven. The reign of the judges calendar period ends. Thus commences a period of truth and prosperity. Nephites seek after riches. The rise of the 4th generation is complete. Nephites retreat downriver on the river Bountiful to the north countries. 3 disciples departed. Innumerable multitudes of Lamanites came. The Nephites and the Lamanites are without Christ and God the Father, now choosing to be led by Satan. Moroni and Mormon are in the hands of Christ. 384. Conclusions. Evolution of ancient languages is a complex subject filled with gaps and controversies. This scholarly 238-page document proposes a set of glyphs, syntax, and linguistic rules, placing the characters document midway between mainstream views of ancient Egyptian and the Mesoamerican glyphs of the 10 centuries that followed the Book of Mormon. Religion is also a subject of controversy. Opponents of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints are never going to accept the Book of Mormon or any translation of the sort that Grover proposes, and the faithful should not expect them to do so. But Jerry Grover has thrown down the gauntlet, and it remains to be seen whether any other scholars will pick it up. In the field of cryptography, mathematicians have shown that it is possible for any set of data to be quote-unquote translated into any desired message, so long as one is willing to employ an obviously contrived, special-purpose, complex key as large as the document itself. That is definitely not what Jerry Grover has done here. By comparison, Grover's logic is simple and defensible, and he has gone to great lengths to document the origins of his glyphs and syntax from the Egyptian hieratic and demotic that was extant in or previous to 600 BC when Lehi left Jerusalem. He has also shown that subsequent Mesoamerican glyphs may have borrowed significantly from the Reformed Egyptian used by Mormon. For the time being, Grover's theory is the best one that leads to anything other than gobbledygook. Will anybody propose a different set of equally logical, equally defensible glyphs and linguistic rules that will result in translation of the characters document into some alternative message instead of gobbledygook? Time will tell. But for now, the fact is that one such interpretation has indeed emerged, and the interlocking, mutually supportive interrelationships between the dates in his translation add strong evidence to his interpretation. Numeric theory compels the reasonable mind to take this seriously. The odds against any such thing emerging from the random imaginings of a charlatan are astronomical and breathtaking.